No doctor had been able to explain why Finn, the 8-year-old son of CEO Astrid Coleman, had never spoken a single word. The boy was diagnosed with profound congenital deafness, a complete inability to produce sound. But on a misty afternoon in the hallway of her company, the janitor, Henry Carter, knelt down, gently touched the child's ear, and pulled out a small device emitting interference frequencies that no one had ever detected. That moment left the CEO frozen in shock, and Finn opened his mouth for the very first time. The glass tower of Coleman Dynamics rose above Manhattan like a monument to ambition. Inside, the air carried the weight of expectation. Employees moved through corridors with purposeful strides, their voices lowered when the CEO passed. Astrid Coleman commanded respect without asking for it. At 34, she had built her technology empire through ruthless focus and an intellect that left competitors scrambling. Her blonde hair fell in careful waves over shoulders always draped in tailored wool. Her eyes, the color of winter sky, rarely softened. She had learned early that warmth was a luxury leaders could not afford. But every fortress has its crack, and Astrid's was the small hand that gripped hers each morning when she arrived at work. Finn was 8 years old, with light brown hair that caught golden sunlight and blue eyes that carried an ancient sadness no child should know. His small frame seemed to shrink further whenever strangers looked too long. The diagnosis had come when he was 6 months old. Profound congenital deafness, the specialists said. Total inability to produce vocal sound. Astrid had spent years since then dragging her son from one medical center to another, from therapy sessions to experimental treatments, from hope to disappointment and back again. Nothing worked. Finn had never made a sound. Not a cry, not a laugh, not even a whimper of pain. The whispers followed them everywhere. She could hear the pity in people's voices when they thought she was not listening. The judgment that said she was too cold, too focused on work, that perhaps this was punishment for her ambition. She had divorced Finn's father when the man suggested they institutionalize their son. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. So Astrid carried on alone, a CEO by day and a heartbroken mother every moment in between. Henry Carter had become invisible the way working people often do. At 36, he possessed the kind of solid build that came from years of physical labor, broad shoulders that moved with quiet efficiency as he pushed his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors of Coleman Dynamics. His face was kind, the sort of face that children instinctively trusted, with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at Finn during their brief encounters. He wore the navy blue uniform of maintenance staff, the fabric worn soft from countless washings. His shoes were old but spotlessly clean. Nobody looked at janitors, and Henry preferred it that way. But Henry Carter had not always been invisible. 10 years ago, he had been Dr. Henry Carter, an acoustic engineer specializing in vibration-assisted devices for hearing-impaired children. He had worked alongside his wife, Matilda, a brilliant researcher who believed that sound could be felt even when it could not be heard. They were going to change the world together. Then came the accident. A drunk driver, a rainy night, a life snuffed out before it had given all it could give. Henry had walked away from his career the day they buried Matilda. The equations reminded him too much of her voice, explaining them. The lab felt haunted, so he took a job where his hands could stay busy and his heart could stay numb. His daughter Bridget was 7 years old, all golden ponytails and irrepressible energy. She was the reason Henry got up each morning, the reason he had not disappeared entirely into grief. Bridget had her mother's gift for seeing what others missed. She noticed when people were sad, when they needed kindness, when a smile might change their entire day. And she had noticed Finn immediately. The first time Bridget saw Finn in the lobby, waiting for his mother to finish a meeting, she marched right up to him and began talking. When he did not respond, she did not look confused or disappointed. She simply took his hand and sat beside him, swinging her legs in companionable silence. Finn's face had transformed. For just a moment, he looked like what he was, a lonely little boy who desperately wanted a friend. Henry had been polishing the floor nearby, watching the interaction with something tight in his chest. He saw how Astrid Coleman swept in 10 minutes later, her heels clicking authoritative rhythms across marble, and how she pulled Finn away with barely a glance at Bridget. He saw the way the CEO's jaw tightened when she noticed her son's small smile fading. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon when the weather had turned gray and heavy. The 17th floor was undergoing renovations, and a large electronic display board was being moved. Something went wrong. The board slipped from the workers' grips and crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder breaking. Finn had been walking with his mother down that very corridor. The impact sent vibrations through the building's structure. But it was not the crash itself that made Finn collapse. As the boy clutched at his ears and crumpled to his knees, his face contorting in agony, something else was happening. Something nobody else could hear. Henry had been cleaning an office 20 feet away. His head snapped up at the sound of the falling board, but his brow furrowed at something else. There was an interference frequency, a high-pitched disruption that should not exist. It was not coming from the board. The pitch was wrong, the harmonic all off. It sounded like a malfunctioning vibration device, the old kind that had been discontinued a decade ago due to faulty frequency modulation. But why would he be hearing that here? Astrid was on her knees beside Finn, her cool composure shattered. The boy was shaking violently, tears streaming down his face, his small hands pressed hard against his ears. His mouth opened in what should have been a scream, but produced no sound. Employees gathered at a distance, uncertain, afraid. Astrid looked up with wild eyes and commanded them back. Henry moved closer, his trained ear following that strange frequency. And then he understood. The interference was not coming from the building. It was coming from Finn himself, specifically from the child's right ear. Henry's heart began to pound. He knew that sound. He had heard it in his lab years ago when testing devices had malfunctioned, but it was impossible. No doctor would have missed a foreign object lodged in a child's ear canal. Finn's breathing had become ragged, rapid, his small body on the edge of panic. Astrid held him, her voice breaking as she whispered reassurances that seemed powerless against whatever invisible force was tearing through her son. Henry made a decision. He stepped forward. Astrid barely registered his presence until he knelt beside them, his voice low and steady. "Miss Coleman, I need you to listen to me carefully. I think there is a device lodged in your son's ear. A vibration device, old technology. It is creating interference. I believe I can remove it safely, but I need your permission." Astrid stared at him as if he had spoken in an unknown language. A janitor, claiming to know something every specialist had missed. It was absurd. But Finn let out another silent cry, his body going rigid, and desperation made its own logic. She gave a single, sharp nod. Henry's hands were steady as he reached into his cart for the small LED penlight he always carried. He gently tilted Finn's head, speaking in a soft murmur. "I know it hurts, buddy. I'm going to help you. Just stay very still for me." The boy's terrified eyes locked onto Henry's calm ones, and something in that gaze seemed to quiet the panic just enough. Henry directed the light into Finn's ear canal, angling carefully. And there it was, lodged deep but visible to someone who knew what they were looking for. A small silicone ring embedded with a vibration generator, the kind designed to stimulate residual hearing through bone conduction. But this device was old, damaged, its frequency oscillator clearly degraded. It had been creating interference for God only knew how long, essentially deafening the boy artificially even if he had any residual hearing capacity. It had probably been inserted by someone unqualified, had slipped deeper over time and become invisible to cursory examinations. With careful precision, Henry used his fingers to gently extract the device. It came free smoothly, a tiny piece of silicon and metal that had stolen years from a child's life. The moment it cleared Finn's ear, the boy gasped. His body went slack, tension draining away like water. He blinked rapidly, and for the first time in what might have been hours or days or months, the pain vanished. Astrid stared at the small object in Henry's palm. Her face had gone absolutely white. "What is that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "It is a bone conduction vibration device," Henry said quietly. "Old technology, discontinued about 10 years ago because they were unstable. This one malfunctioned. It has been creating interference that would block any residual hearing your son might have had and cause significant discomfort, maybe even pain. I am sorry. No child should have endured this." Astrid looked from the device to her son, who was breathing normally now, his eyes clearer than she had seen them in years. Then she looked back at Henry, and the tears came. She had spent 8 years believing her son was trapped in permanent silence. 8 years blaming fate or God or her own inadequate love. And the answer had been a tiny piece of broken machinery that a janitor found in 30 seconds. She pulled Finn against her chest and wept into his hair, great heaving sobs that had been locked inside her since the diagnosis. Employees still hovered at a distance, confused and concerned. But Astrid Coleman did not care who saw her break. Henry quietly placed the device into a small plastic bag and stood, giving them space. Later, after Finn had been taken to the medical suite and pronounced physically fine, after the crowd had dispersed, Astrid found Henry in a storage room, putting away his supplies. She stood in the doorway, still shaken, her careful armor nowhere in sight. "Why did you know?" she asked. "About the device." Henry paused, then turned to face her. For a long moment he debated how much to say. Then he decided she deserved the truth. "I was an acoustic engineer once. I worked on vibration-assisted hearing devices. My wife and we wanted to help children like Finn. She died 10 years ago, and I left that life behind. But I never forgot the work." Astrid absorbed this. "You saved my son. I just removed a piece of broken equipment. You gave him a chance nobody else saw." Her voice was fierce now, through the exhaustion and tears. "How can I ever repay that?" "You cannot," Henry said simply. "And you do not need to. Take care of him. That is enough." But it was not enough for Astrid. That night, she had the device analyzed by a private laboratory. The results confirmed everything Henry had said and revealed something worse. The device had been purchased on an unregulated market years ago by Finn's previous nanny, a woman who had claimed she was helping but had no medical training whatsoever. It had never been approved for pediatric use. It had been slowly degrading, creating increasingly severe interference. Finn had been living in not silence, but noise, a constant barrage of disrupted frequencies that would have made any residual hearing impossible to develop and might have caused neurological stress. No wonder he had seemed to shut down so completely. Astrid felt guilt crash over her in waves. She had trusted the wrong people. She had been so busy building an empire that she had missed the torture device lodged in her own child's ear. She sat in Finn's room that night, watching him sleep peacefully for the first time in his memory, and whispered apologies into the darkness. The next day, Finn did not want to go to the office. He clung to Astrid's leg, his eyes wide with what looked like fear. She realized with a jolt that the world probably sounded overwhelming to him now. Without the interference, every noise would be hitting him for the first time. Unfiltered, sharp, too much. She tried to keep him home, but meetings could not be rescheduled, and her assistant was sick. So she brought him, promising he could stay in her office with headphones and his favorite books. But children do not stay where they are put when they are frightened. Halfway through Astrid's video conference, Finn slipped out. He wandered through corridors that felt different now, louder, echoing. When rain began hammering against the windows, The sound drove him outside through a side door. He ran across the small courtyard to a covered alcove and huddled there, hands over his ears, overwhelmed. Henry found him 10 minutes later. Bridget had been with him for a brief visit after school, and she had seen Finn running. "Dad, he is scared," she had said, tugging Henry's sleeve. So Henry followed, leaving Bridget with the receptionist, and found Finn curled into himself under a stone overhang, rain creating a curtain between him and the world. Henry approached slowly, then sat down a few feet away. He did not try to talk. Instead, he knocked 3 times on the stone bench beside him. A clear, simple rhythm. Finn's head lifted slightly. Henry knocked again. 3 beats. A pattern. Then he knocked on his own chest, letting Finn see and feel the vibration through the air. The boy's eyes fixed on him. Henry began to teach Finn something crucial in that rain-soaked moment. Sound was not just noise. It was pattern. It was rhythm. It could be felt as much as heard. He knocked different patterns on stone, on wood, on his own body, and watched Finn slowly unfold. The boy's hand reached out tentatively and knocked twice on the bench. Henry smiled and knocked back. They sat there, communicating through percussion while rain fell, until Astrid found them. She stood at the edge of the courtyard, umbrella forgotten in her hand, watching the janitor and her son speak a language she did not understand but desperately wanted to learn. When Henry looked up and met her eyes, something passed between them that had nothing to do with words. Gratitude, connection, understanding. Astrid had the device sent to 3 different specialists. They all agreed that Finn likely had partial hearing capacity through bone conduction. The faulty device had not just blocked it, but had created an actively hostile sound environment. With proper therapy and time, Finn might develop both hearing and speech. Might. The word hung like a fragile ornament. Astrid made a decision that shocked her board of directors. She created a new division within Coleman Dynamics, a research department focused on acoustic therapy and safe assistive devices for children. And she offered Henry Carter a position as senior consultant. Henry stared at the offer letter like it was written in an alien script. Bridget jumped up and down with excitement when he showed her. "Dad, you can help lots of kids like Finn, just like you and Mom wanted to." Her joy was impossible to resist. So Henry accepted. He traded his janitor's uniform for collared shirts and found himself back in a world he had abandoned. But this time, the ghosts were quieter, and he had a purpose again. Help Finn find his voice. The therapy process was slow and painstaking. Henry used techniques his wife had developed, refined with modern technology. Vibration boards that taught Finn to feel sound frequencies. Light panels that synchronized with rhythm. Most importantly, Henry taught Finn to place his small hand on his own throat and chest to feel the vibrations of his own voice when he tried to make sounds. Bridget became Finn's constant companion in these sessions. She would chatter away, letting Finn feel the vibrations of her throat, showing him that words were physical things. She had no self-consciousness, no pity, just pure determination to help her friend. Weeks passed. Then months. Finn learned to differentiate sounds through bone conduction and vibration. He began to understand that the movements of his mouth and throat could create patterns. But he still had not spoken. The frustration showed on Astrid's face every day, the hope slowly curdling into familiar despair. Then, one afternoon in the therapy room, with rain tapping gentle fingers on windows and Bridget holding one of Finn's hands while Henry held the other, Finn placed his palm on his own throat and made a conscious effort to push air through his vocal cords while forming a shape with his lips. The sound that emerged was small and rough, barely there, but it was unmistakable. The room went absolutely still. Finn's eyes widened in shock. He had felt his own sound. Bridget squealed with delight. Henry's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. and Astrid, watching through the observation window, pressed both hands to her mouth and sobbed. Finn tried again. Louder this time. He looked at his mother through the glass with something like wonder breaking across his face. She rushed into the room and fell to her knees in front of him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, baby. That is your voice. That is you." Finn touched his throat, feeling the vibration, and then touched hers. "Mom?" The word was barely formed, half sound and half breath. But it was the most beautiful thing Astrid Coleman had ever heard. She pulled him into her arms and rocked him while he kept trying, kept feeling the vibrations of sound, kept discovering the miracle of his own voice. Henry turned away to give them privacy and found Bridget watching him with her mother's perceptive eyes. "You did it, Dad," she said softly. "You and Mom together. She would be so proud." The final revelation came during a comprehensive evaluation by a leading specialist. The doctor confirmed that Finn's hearing capacity, while limited, was present. He could hear through bone conduction and would likely develop enough hearing with proper amplification to function in a hearing world. But more importantly, the years of faulty device interference had not caused permanent neurological damage. Finn's brain could still learn speech. He had just needed someone who understood how to teach him. "Your son was not deaf," the doctor told Astrid gently. "He was artificially deafened by defective equipment. It is tragic. But the good news is that you found someone who recognized the problem and removed it before permanent damage occurred." Astrid sat very still, processing this. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her chest. "How many years did my son lose?" The doctor hesitated, most of his developmental window for speech. "But Dr. Carter's methods are giving him a second chance. That is more than many children get." But the corporate world does not easily accept that a CEO might prioritize personal matters over profit margins. When Astrid announced Henry's new position and the formation of the acoustic therapy division, her board of directors pushed back hard. They called emergency meetings. They questioned her judgment. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Marcus, who had never liked taking orders from a woman, was particularly harsh. "This is a technology company, not a charity," he said coldly during a tense board meeting. "And you have given extraordinary authority to a janitor based on one lucky accident. This looks like emotional decision-making, Astrid. Frankly, it makes the company look weak." Astrid stood slowly, her hands flat on the polished table. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Henry Carter saved my son's life. He identified a problem that 8 years of expensive specialists missed. He has more practical knowledge in his field than anyone I have interviewed, and I am not asking for your permission to trust him. I am informing you of a decision I have made. If any of you would like to challenge my authority to make that decision, I suggest you review your contracts and remember who built this company." The room went silent. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again. Nobody challenged her. The motion passed, but something had shifted between Astrid and Henry that went beyond professional respect. She began finding excuses to visit the therapy room, to watch Finn's progress, to ask Henry questions about the techniques he used. Often, she arrived just as sessions ended and would linger, talking about nothing in particular while Finn and Bridget played. One evening, after a particularly successful session where Finn had produced 3 distinct vowel sounds, Astrid did something unprecedented. She invited Henry and Bridget to dinner at her apartment. Not a formal thank-you event with caterers and champagne, just pizza and a movie in her living room, with both children sprawled on the floor and 2 adults trying to remember how to be something other than professionals. Astrid wore jeans and a sweater, no makeup, her hair loose. Henry almost did not recognize her. She looked younger, softer, infinitely more tired. Bridget charmed Finn into playing board games. Henry and Astrid sat on the couch and talked about everything except work. His wife, her divorce, The weight of being a single parent, the guilt that came with every decision, the fear that they were failing their children even as they tried their best. I spent years thinking I was not enough, Astrid said quietly, watching Finn laugh silently at something Bridget did. That I was not a good enough mother because I could not fix him. And all along, there was nothing wrong with him that needed fixing. There was just a broken machine hurting him, and nobody looked closely enough to see. You could not have known, Henry said. You trusted experts. That is what parents are supposed to do. But you knew. In 30 seconds, you knew. Henry shook his head. I recognized a sound from a past life. That is all. Luck and timing. You keep saying that. But I think you are better than you know. She turned to look at him directly. Why did you really become a janitor, Henry? You could have gone to any company with your credentials. He was quiet for a long time. Because I needed to disappear. Because every time I saw research equipment or heard someone discuss frequencies, I saw Matilda's face. Because I was angry at the world and myself, and I needed to be somewhere nobody expected anything from me. He met her eyes, until Bridget reminded me that hiding was not the same as healing. Astrid understood that completely. They sat in comfortable silence while the children played, while New York City glittered beyond the windows, while two broken people discovered they might be able to fit their jagged pieces together. The transformation in Finn was remarkable. Within 6 months, he could produce full words, though his pronunciation was rough and he still relied heavily on sign language and lip reading. But he communicated. He laughed out loud for the first time. He called his mother Mom clearly enough that she wept, and he called Henry Henry, which made Bridget dissolve into giggles. Henry's acoustic therapy center within Coleman Dynamics began attracting national attention. Parents brought children from across the country. Several of them had stories similar to Finn's. Misdiagnoses, missed interventions, years of unnecessary silence. Henry worked with each child patiently, teaching them that sound was not just hearing but feeling, that communication came in many forms, that their voices mattered even if they sounded different. Astrid changed too. She smiled more. She left work earlier. She attended every single one of Finn's therapy sessions. She donated millions to hearing impairment research, and she stopped pretending she did not watch Henry Carter with something more than professional respect. Bridget noticed first, naturally. You like Miss Coleman, she told her father one night with the blunt certainty of a 7-year-old who saw everything. Henry had been tucking her into bed. She is my boss, honey. She is pretty. And she likes you too. I saw her smile at you the way Mom used to smile at you in old photos. Henry's breath caught. It is okay, Dad. She reached up and patted his cheek with a small, serious hand. Mom would want you to be happy. She told me once that love does not run out just because someone dies. It grows bigger to make room for more. Henry kissed his daughter's forehead and left the room before she could see him cry. The center's official grand opening was scheduled for a crisp December evening, with dignitaries and press and everyone who mattered in medical technology. But before the doors opened to the public, there was a private moment in the main therapy room. Just Astrid and Henry and their 2 children, standing together in a space built from tragedy and hope. Finn had been practicing something in secret with Bridget's help. Now he stood in front of Henry, his small shoulders squared with determination. He took a deep breath, placed one hand on his own throat to monitor the vibrations, and spoke with startling clarity. Thank you, Dad. Henry went absolutely still. The word hung in the air, clear and perfect. Dad. Not his name. Not Henry. Dad. You can call me that if you want, Finn said quickly, words tumbling out now that he had started. Because you helped me talk, and you are nice to Mom. And Bridget says we are family now, and families have dads. And I never had one before, not really. So can you be mine? Henry dropped to his knees and pulled Finn into his arms. This small, brave boy who had survived so much. "Yes," he whispered hoarsely. "Yes, I can be your dad." Astrid stood beside them with Bridget, both of them crying, and when Henry looked up at her with wet eyes and a trembling smile, she reached down and took his hand. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They both knew that a family had formed in the spaces between heartbreak and healing. That sometimes the people who save you are the ones you never see coming. That love does not follow logic but finds its way regardless. The grand opening was a success. The center was praised in every major publication. Funding requests poured in. Children arrived with hope in their parents' eyes. And at the end of that long, triumphant evening, Astrid Coleman stood at the window of her office with Henry Carter beside her, watching New York City light up the night. "I built an empire," she said softly. "But you built something better. You built bridges to voices that were lost." "We built it together," Henry corrected. "You gave me the chance, the resources, the trust." She turned to face him. "You gave me my son's voice, and something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" "Hope." She smiled. "And maybe the beginning of something else." Henry understood what she was offering, what she was asking. He thought of Matilda, who had always wanted him to be happy, who had made Bridget promise to make sure he did not stop living when she died. He thought of Finn calling him Dad. He thought of the way Astrid looked at him when she did not know he was watching, like he was something precious and unexpected. "The beginning sounds perfect," he said quietly, and when her hand found his in the darkness, he held on tight. 1 year passed in a heartbeat. The center expanded to 3 locations. Finn enrolled in a special program for children with hearing impairments, but spent his afternoons in regular classes. Confident now, his speech improving every day. Bridget and Finn became inseparable, more siblings than friends, finishing each other's sentences in a combination of signs and words that nobody else quite understood. And on a Saturday morning in December, the same courtyard where Henry had once taught Finn about rhythm in the rain was transformed into something magical. Tiny white lights were strung through bare trees. A small gathering of friends and family stood witness. There was no fanfare, no press, no grand ceremony. Just Astrid in a simple white dress, Henry in a dark suit, and 2 children holding hands between them. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Bridget raised her hand solemnly. Everyone laughed. "I object to waiting any longer," she announced. "I have been waiting forever for Finn to officially be my brother." Finn signed something quickly, and Bridget translated with a grin. "He says, I have been a bossy sister since before it was official anyway." The ceremony was brief and beautiful. When it was over and they were declared a family in every way that mattered, Finn tugged on Henry's sleeve. His voice was clear now, still slightly musical in its cadence, but unmistakably his own. "Dad," he said, and the word still made Henry's heart stutter. "Can I say something?" "Of course, buddy." Finn turned to the small gathering and spoke carefully. "I was quiet for a long time, not because I wanted to be, but because I could not be anything else. And then Dad found me. He heard me even when I had no voice. He taught me that sound is not just noise, it is connection, it is love." He looked at Henry, then at Astrid. "Thank you for being my voice until I found my own. And thank you for being my family." There was not a dry eye in the courtyard. Astrid pulled both children into her arms while Henry stood behind them, his hands on their shoulders, and felt the weight of the past finally lift. They had all been broken in different ways. They had all been lost in silence. But they had found each other in the spaces between words, and they had built something beautiful from the pieces. Later, as the celebration wound down and snow began to fall in soft white whispers, Henry found himself standing alone for a moment, watching his new family through the window. Bridget and Finn were teaching Astrid a complicated hand-clapping game. All 3 of them were laughing. He felt a presence beside him that was not quite there, warm and familiar. a whisper of memory that felt like blessing. Matilda's voice in his heart, telling him what she had always told him. Go forward. Love fully. Do not hide from joy because you fear losing it again. Live. Henry smiled and went inside to join his family. The snow fell heavier now, covering the city in silence. But inside the warm room there was noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of people who had found their way home. And in the center of it all, a small boy with a strong, clear voice called out to his father and was heard.